Time for English practice. I'm here. I was invited down. I'm a retired professor from Stanford University. I have a mixed background in engineering and art. I've been there a number of years, and among other things, I helped many years ago start a program that's cooperative between art and design and engineering, and it still lives. About 12 years ago, I retired, but I didn't make it, so I'm still associated with it. And I was asked to come here and talk to some people in various universities about things like combination interdisciplinary programs and so on and so forth. And when I received my agenda, it included the talk I'm about to make. And this was quite recently. And the title of the talk that was given to me without my permission was the effect of design thinking on social problems and so on. And I thought, now that's interesting. I have no idea what that means. And so I found out, and it's interesting enough that I thought, gee, if I have to tell you about it, I'll really think about it, and that would be good for me. So let's start. I'm going to kind of key off the talk I just saw about the mouse-born ear because the design was dropped as a word, and maybe ears running around looking like mice or whatever have something to do with social problems. So let me start with design thinking. Have anybody heard that term? It's a coming buzzword in business. Businesses like buzzwords for 4 or 5 years because they can write books and have executive programs and go to nice golf courses and talk about it and so on and feel that they're into a new thing. And then in 5 years or so, another one will come up and sort of obsolete that. You're going to hear about design thinking. I'm from Stanford University, and we may have been partly responsible because there are lots of kind of designers, airplane designers and ladies' underwear designers and you know, house designers and so on. And you can ask, is there anything in common between people who design ladies' underwear and people who design airplanes? There's a lot not in common. The materials are different, the specifications are different, but yes, there are some things in common. And you find a lot of people teaching design in universities, and they're often at the bottom of the totem pole or the pecking order. In other words, people teaching design in art schools are outranked by painting and sculpture. People teaching design and engineers are outranked by science and mathematics and so on. And the people who do that become unhappy with that. Our program, which was ranked below most engineering disciplines, produced some really marvelous people. One of them named David Kelly. And he's marvelous in the sense that David, after he graduated, went off and started a design firm, which he called David Kelly Designs. And no one came to hire him. And so he talked to some wiser people, and they say, David, no one knew who you are. And they started talking, and David had a little money, so his advice was to take his money and go hire a young female public advertising person, take her home and let her advertise you, and the result is history. His firm, which is called IDEO, is by far the biggest and most successful design firm / consulting ever, and it's after it became very large and successful, he got the itch to be a professor for some reason, I'm not quite sure. So we hired him, and it was quite a bit of hassle getting the academics to think that he was qualified to be a professor. But using his PR ability and the fact that he was able to raise some 36 million US dollars from one of his ex-clients made him a professor. And he decided, he started a very interesting thing. I don't know whether it's an experiment or reality. It's called the D School for Design. And it's a collection. It doesn't have faculty, it doesn't give degrees, it has money. And it it's a collection of courses and projects and so on that have some interesting criteria. All courses are taught by 2 or more people from 2 or more disciplines. The students come from many disciplines and work in teams, of which at least 5 disciplines must be represented. And the projects run over 1 year, but they're in all series of completions, and they go kind of from problem to finished hardware, which has to be available in the market and so on. And it goes in many directions. Well, one thing Kelly decided is that the reason that design in a university is not highly valued is because it's somewhere down there like making baskets and things. And somehow universities of great caliber don't value making baskets the way they should. So he started talking about design thinking. He figured, how can schools ignore design if it's about thinking? And I think this timing was great because people are picking it up now. Well, what is it? David says you can't describe it. You have to experience it to know what it is. And that leaves people like me kind of out there because I run around a lot and people ask me, and so I have to figure out what it is. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what it is, and let's talk about a consulting designer who's hired, say, by people either because they're not sure they have the ability to do this or because they'd like a different input. And this is different than what's called a staff designer. Staff designer may work for Ford Motor Company, and someone tells them to design a rearview mirror, and that's what they should do. But if you have a client and you're an independent consulting designer, and I am, the first principle is that the client is bothered, but the client may not know what the problem really is. And the client may give you a problem that's all full of what they know and think the direction is to go. Now, as a consulting designer, it's quite fair if someone asks you to do something that you come up with something that makes them happier than that which they ask you to do. So step 1 is amazing, amazing compared to the usual practice, messing around with the problem. And, you know, should I take an example? Well, I'll follow on the rat with the ear. The US seems to have a problem with health care. Do you hear about that down here? Apparently we can't afford it. And there are reasons why I think that's true. After World War II, we had a great many, mostly males, in the military. And apparently, after they came home, they spent about 10 years making love. And out of that came some 70 million people who are now between the ages of 65 and somewhat younger. This is called the baby boom, the baby boomers. And they have been a voting bloc, a very powerful group of people. And they've pretty much gotten what they wanted in life. And now they're turning 65 and getting old. And one thing they do not want to do is die ever, or even limp around much. And as a result, some 25% of the health care money in the world goes to people in the last few years of life. So it is a problem. Now, it's not soluble. One of the first principles of creativity is to realize that we're not nearly as smart as we think we are. If you look at experiments done on the brain, it's really slow. It's kind of pathetic. It can only hold a few things. And so it's useful because it contains in itself many limits to what you can do with it unless you force it to give up and do things. And these are mental blocks, and I can do them. I write books on them. Fear of failure is one. Lots of things are in there. And we won't go into them, even though they're more fun. But so what you have to do now is you say, I don't know if you hear about the US Congress. They're always messing with this. And you can tell when problems are too big to people because they revert to their faith. So free enterprise people and socialists can't ever solve anything because one believes in the free market and one believes in socialism, and neither one works alone. So if you look at Congress, it's tied up as to whether the government should take care of people or whether or not industry should take care of people, and people are confused. We have these people called Tea Party people, and one of them made a famous quote, which the government should stay out of medicine and definitely not touch my Medicare. Medicare is a government-based health care policy. So she wants them to keep their hands off, except she doesn't want them to take away the money they already give her. So the first thing you suspect is, problems. Maybe they got a problem phrased in some way that's not soluble by people who have finite brains. So you might think of breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. Or you might think of phrasing it in different ways. There's a company called Synectics that found out, interestingly enough, that if you take someone's statement of a problem and get a group to restate it, they'll ordinarily like somebody else's statement rather than theirs. So you might do that. And one thing you might pick up is this difficulty with death. And you might then take a sub-piece of that. Well, I'm not going to solve a problem, but that's interesting to me, because last week my 97-year-old mother died quickly and sort of surprisingly, and she was in pretty good shape, except she was starting to realize she was losing it, and she didn't. So this was kind of miraculous. Well, I learned something. In the US, if you're not breathing for about 3 minutes, your brain is being damaged. You should not, there's a number called 911 that you punch to get emergency care. There's no possibility of the emergency care getting there within 3 minutes, but they have so much equipment they can get you breathing again up to about 15 minutes, at which point you are a perfectly healthy vegetable. And so you say, well, okay, let's take a subset of the aging problem. What could we do to keep from being turned into a vegetable by the emergency people? And now, hey, that sounds solvable, doesn't it? So then what we do is might phrase that in different ways until we get something that really lights up. Now, one of the things that's being pushed is empathy. There are a lot of business books on empathy, which means you should really understand the customer, which in this case I think is my mother. And so you should hang out with older people, get to understand them, and then start being very creative and sticking together a large number of ideas, creativity, that are possibilities. And that means spending much more time on thinking of alternates than is usually done, especially in these kind of problems. Because the tendency of people is to get together and think of the right answer, and there are none. So there's a creative part of coming up with lots of alternates. And then what you have to do is experiment, because nobody's smart enough to figure out what to do. And so you get people to try different things until you get different approaches. Now, interestingly enough, in the US, Vermont, one state, wants to go to government medical care, but the federal government won't let them. California wants to legalize marijuana, but the federal government doesn't want them. Those are beautiful experiments, because we really don't know what legalizing marijuana would do. We really don't know what federal government would do. We should let all the states try different things and then pick out which one is the best, because, well, one knows. So what you do is you have a lot of ideas, and then you prototype them, okay? And then you spend a lot of time letting people live with them, and then you pick one. So rather than having the US Senate get together for a month and get the right answer, you spend 15 years coming up with a lot of approaches to answering a small piece of the question and then pick the best one. And then what you do is you do it again. You go around and say, okay, we've got a way to keep these wonderful emergency people from turning us into vegetables. Now what we do? And what you do is you slowly put this thing into bite-sized pieces. You have ideas. You judge the ideas based on really having a good feeling for what the customer wants. You test them, and you go round, round, round. So those things I mentioned, those parts of the process, might be what design thinking is, and they just might work on social problems. That's been a big insight to me on this trip, because I argue with Kelly that what he does doesn't apply to social problems. So I have to thank you, and I have to thank the people on this trip for giving me an astonishing subject to give a talk on, because it's totally changed my mind on the subject. Now let me say that this solving of problems is going against your instincts and going against normal instincts. Profit-making businesses would like to solve a problem with as little expense as possible. And so they would not like to spend a lot of time testing alternate ideas, prototyping, being sensitive to the customer, and so on. I got asked a question this morning by a student, what's the difference between this and marketing? Well, first of all, designers have never taken a marketing course, and marketing people have never designed anything. But there is some overlap. But marketing is usually an efficient process to tune a product from a given something to their customer pool. And what I'm talking about is less efficient, but it's an attempt to maybe not, it's possible that you can consult for a company and the right answer comes out to not have anything to do with the product the company makes, at which point you better be really close to who hired you. And you better be drinking regularly, but that's still fair because it means a misfit and you're saying your product won't have anything to do with fixing what's wrong with you. So it's fair and so on. Marketing is much more targeted to making sure you maximize the profit on things. Now, how do you make this happen? I don't know. We're teaching it. And the students are loving it. Strange things are happening. One of the more successful courses is, it's called Extreme Affordability. And it's mostly business school students designing things for villages in India, or probably Burma. Your villages are actually too wealthy. Example, a lot of villages have found out that irrigation is critical to high products, and they've used pedal-powered pumps a lot. Naturally, drip irrigation is more effective, so you need a pedal-powered pressure pump, which is harder. And so the class, over 2 or 3 years, developed a pedal-powered pressure pump for about $20 US if you don't make a profit. And it's being sold quite widely in Burma, Myanmar. And the business school is sitting there because some of its students are loving making things that have no profit. And so these things sometimes result in kind of wonderful things, and it's an interdisciplinary thing because you can actually do stuff like this in the university and make it attractive to a wide variety of different people. So it's an interesting academic experience, and it's making us all think about how widely this design, how well you can describe this design process generally enough that it's usable in a very strong, a very wide area of things. And so I would like to thank you of TEDx for giving me the opportunity of thinking this through at your expense. And that's it. I have no seconds left.